Joe Biden has announced that he is dropping out of the presidential race. Joe Biden is to step down as the Democratic Party candidate in the race for the US presidency. The US president said, "I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." What are your thoughts? It's Jova.
Jove. I knew it was coming. There was too much pressure. I think leading up to the point of him announcing this, we had about, I think it was like 36, 37 Democrats already say that he needs to pull out. We had Joe Manchin, the now independent former Democratic senator, already say earlier today that he had to pull out. I think this was inevitable. But obviously, the answer is now who's going to replace him? I'm sure we can come to that actually in a moment. I do want to stick to Joe for a moment. My head is everywhere. It's swerving. There's so many things that could be happening. Um, I think with Joe Biden, the problem is that we've been living in this gerontocracy for a while. The issue is that despite the fact that Joe Biden is now stepping down, it took Nancy Pelosi, a woman who is the same age as him, to convince him and get the party to convince him to step down too. We need a bit of youth
Mm.
in the party. We need a bit of youth in all of politics, which obviously we're blessed with a little bit more over here in Europe. But we have people who are part of the old guard. I think, I don't know, this idea that Joe Biden was unsuitable only because he was too old and he was a little bit weak on camera and he wasn't too good at debates is, I think, for me, only a small part of the problem. I think the fact that he represents a type of politics for me that doesn't even exist anymore, and keeping into, I don't know, politics of what, 5 generations ago. He's been in politics for the better part of half a century. I feel like it was going to be a failed campaign, regardless of how weak or old he was anyway.
Callum, I want to get your thoughts too, and also maybe respond to Lewis saying that Joe Biden, obviously in terms of age, he's old,
Mhm.
but he represents. I mean, this is from Lewis's words. He represents the politics of decades ago. And would you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, I think he certainly does. Although you would expect that and hope certainly that someone that's had nearly half a century, as Lewis put it, in working in politics, that they would be absolutely the right candidate for president. But yeah, I think there's been a whole host of things. It's been a long time coming. I'm shocked to see the news, given it seemed as though certainly from Joe Biden's sort of nearest and dearest up until very recently that he was not going anywhere. He had the whole debate debacle, situation with Zelensky, where he called him Putin, referring to Kamala Harris as Donald Trump. There's been a
Mm.
whole host of gaffes, and then I think. I think getting diagnosed with coronavirus this last week, testing positive for that's probably helped him out because it's given him a bit of time to take a little bit of a back burner, to rest, and to sort of think seriously about what he's going to do. And while I'm glad to see him stepping down, I fear that this is only going to help fuel the Trump campaign. Donald Trump's already put a statement out on Truth Social literally in the last 20 to 25 minutes or so. He's talking about immigration again. He's talking about how awful the presidency of Biden has been for the country and how we
Mm.
need to make America great again. And I do worry that this scramble amongst the Democrats now is just going to lead to even less support for them come the ballot in November.
Okay, so I want to touch upon a few things here. One, I mean, I'm not sure if I agree with you, Lewis, when you say that Joe Biden represents the politics of decades ago, and whether that speaks for those of us on the left. I mean, a lot of people charge that against Jeremy Corbyn, right? They say, "Well, he's talking out from the '70s." And in fact, good, he's talking about public ownership and he's talking about raising taxes on the wealthy, rather than those at the top of the Labour Party, the Blairites, who have modernised the party, which is essentially pro privatisation. So, in a way, that politics of decades ago, I don't think is bad. In fact, a lot of the good things that has come out from Joe Biden in terms of being quite strong on Labour. Look, I think Joe Biden was probably the most, if you want to say, radical or at least progressive president before it came to Gaza. Probably for the last 60 years. I mean, the National Relations Board, in terms of shifting the balance of power towards workers against companies, has been really quite big for Joe Biden. I mean, even just on a sentimental level, he won't cross the picket line. Again, I know it doesn't mean that Joe Biden is some kind of comrade socialist or anything like that. He's still part of the Democratic Party, which is a pro-corporate party. But he's certainly more radical than someone like Obama, who campaigned as a Bernie Sanders light, talking about fat cats and Wall Street, and obviously did nothing about it. But Joe Biden actually had some excuse me, Joe Biden actually had some policies in there. Obviously, when it came to Israel Palestine, he's been awful. But in terms of, I mean, let's go back to you, Callum. Actually, you said you were shocked that Biden said he was going to pull out. I mean, is it really a shock? It's not.
No, I'm
Go on.
shocked. I'm shocked that he's agreed to pull out. He needed to go, and he's been needing to go for a long time. I think, as someone pointed out in the comments, he's been, to use the commenter's words, he's been gaga for a while now. But in all seriousness, he has been struggling significantly for a lot longer than just this election campaign, and it's long overdue. But I'm shocked that he's actually seen sense and gone, you know what? Actually, I need to, because I had visions of him running it right up until November, going ahead with it, having a huge defeat, and ending up in a situation where he wasn't president simply because he lost the election, rather than because he stepped down, which will give the Democrats 5 more years to sort of regroup. But yeah, I'm shocked he's agreed to do it, because he seems so stubborn about going. But I'm not surprised that it's come to this.
Yeah. I mean, I think had he pulled out maybe 3 weeks ago, it would have been a shock. But I think when you have establishment corporate Democrats, when you have Nancy Pelosi, Joe Manchin, Adam Schiff, actually, when they call for Biden to go, it's over, because these are, I don't want to say heavyweights, but they are big people well, Joe Manchin is independent now, but the other figures are quite high up in the Democratic Party. So I think when you've got essentially the establishment turning around saying Joe Biden must go, that then becomes the mainstream opinion, which is actually quite surprising, because AOC, one of the more progressive side of the Democratic Party, kind of stuck with Joe Biden longer than anyone else. I mean, I'll bring Lewis in on that one, actually. I mean, I'll get back to you, Callum, but Lewis, your response on AOC kind of sticking it to the end.
Yeah, I've been following her on social media. She's been posting videos literally every night explaining why this would be an absolutely terrible idea. And, I'm not going to disagree with her, because we won't know how this turns out until we actually see, right? This is a massive risk, what they're taking. And AOC is absolutely right on this, because what could happen is that a fight could break out. We'll probably come to this in a moment, but just because Kamala Harris has been endorsed by Joe Biden, it does not mean she's going to be the candidate. So if we do go down that path where it turns into a big fight leading up to the convention, it could, fracture the Democratic Party, which is exactly what AOC has warned against. She's also warned against the fact that this could, fracture the campaigning on the ground. I am a big advocate of grassroots, on the ground, knocking on doors type of campaigning. And I think that's been proven time and time again. It's the most effective form of campaigning. And to potentially have to build up another team again, or even to take over part of Biden's team, whoever is the next candidate, it's going to affect it in some sort of negative way, right? Because they're going to want to bring in their own people, they're going to want to bring in their own managers, things are going to have to change, so it's going to negatively affect the campaign in that way. So yes,
I mean,
she's absolutely right.
Is that your so I was going to say, you say she's absolutely right. I mean, is that your understanding of why, or do you think it makes sense? Because to me, that doesn't really make sense, because at the end of the day, it was best to call for Joe Biden to step down 3 weeks ago. Get on with the race.
That's the point that I was going to round it off to. I was going to go devil's advocate and say, but on the other end is that she's right. That could happen. But also, if Biden was going to lose anyway, why not take this risk and put up a very strong candidate against Joe Biden? But I do want to quickly go back to the point that I made before about Biden being a politician of old. I don't necessarily mean that the way in age. I don't just want to be ageist. There are plenty of people his age who are very competent politicians. It's more to do with how he's campaigning, right? So the reason why Trump is so successful successful in the way he is because, I was just reading today that the rally he did in Michigan, he stood up for 110 minutes and did a speech. Those speeches are very boring. I hate them, but the guy has got vigor. He's got energy. He constantly does these rallies. Joe Biden doesn't. Donald Trump is engaged so much on social media. He's all over the media. He was on CNN immediately after Biden announced that he was stepping down. They're not that reactive. His campaign is slow. And when I say like he's of the politics of old, he's like the old-fashioned, let's get a picture with this world leader with a handshake type of politician. That's
He's not
what
a
I mean.
populist, is he?
Yeah, he's not even necessarily
But then no
populism.
one
I
else in the
just don't think he's
Democratic
engaging
Party
with people
is. I mean,
in a modern way.
because obviously we are going to come on to the candidates most likely to replace Joe Biden, but
Yes.
none of them, the likely ones, are populist. Bernie Sanders was a left populist, but obviously there's no chance he's going to be the candidate, obviously. So,
But
I guess
does it need to be? Do we? Sorry to interrupt, but does it need to be a populist candidate? I mean, Joe
No,
Biden
I don't think
beat
it does
Trump,
at all.
so
Yeah.
if we can find, I think what worries me about that is who's, who else it could be, which we'll come on to, but.
Well, yeah, no, I agree. It doesn't need to be, but I guess that was I was just trying to sort of push back a little bit of what you were saying, Lewis, in terms of like sort of the politics of old. But I understand in terms of you need energy, right? You might not be a populist, but you do need energy. And as you've just rightly pointed out, Lewis, I mean, Trump is going everywhere. He's done 110-minute speech is wild.
Yeah.
They are, and by the way, they are very long and boring. Trump speeches are
Very
not,
boring.
entertaining. Actually, I wondered, did you catch up on the RNC?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
Trump, did you notice? I know this is not necessarily topical, and we're talking about Joe Biden here, but I thought it was really interesting now that you're here to talk about maybe Trump after the assassination attempt. His energy has changed. I mean, when he was the words he was using was unity.
Mm.
Do you think that maybe either Trump has had personal revelation since the shooting? Do you think advisors around him have said, okay, maybe you're going a bit too far with like the aggressive right-wing rhetoric, maybe pull it back a bit? But at the RNC, Trump sounded very, very different.
No, I disagree. I think there were some stories covering Trump in a way that maybe, yeah, he hasn't spoken of unity before, but also he immediately defaulted and back to who he was, right? So, like, yeah, he spoke of unity. He obviously he also made this into a religious thing as well, which was very obvious. We knew he was going to do this. That
Yeah.
it was, it was God who saved him, or Jesus, or whoever else, or whatever else has intervened. He's going to use a lot of this rhetoric now, and I think it's working as well. I've come across quite a few people over the last week or so who genuinely thinks that God intervened in this. So they've got two angles to approach this from, right? They've got the religious angle and the unity angle, and that's newer for Trump on the unity side of things. But if you actually watch some of the speeches at the RNC and his rhetoric online, he's already immediately defaulted back into his old behavior.
Well, he's done it. He's done it tonight. I've got his statement here from that we've not had a chance to get a graphic for, but in terms of what's happened tonight with Joe Biden, he's actually said it's typical Trump. He said crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president, and he's certainly not fit to serve, and never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, and not leaving his basement. All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't. And now look at what he's done to our country with millions of people coming across our border, totally unchecked and unvetted, many from prisons, mental institutions, and record numbers of terrorists. We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly. Make America great again, in capital letters. And that was posted on his Truth Social about an hour ago, give or take. And I mean,
Well,
that
very
is
short-lived.
typical Donald Trump, isn't it?
Very short-lived, then, at least. Right, let's get back to the Democratic Party. Let's talk about the successor. It's expected to be Kamala Harris, of course. Joe Biden has said that she should be the Democratic candidate. Lewis, let's get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I just really want to quickly explain to anyone like how this is actually going to work, right?
Yeah.
So Joe Biden has stepped down, meaning he already went through the primaries to get the nomination. And then in a few weeks at the Democratic National Convention, the DNC, they were going to officially nominate him the same way that Donald Trump just a few days ago was the official Republican candidate. Now what's going to happen that he's won the primaries, the Democratic Party representatives from each state, delegates, will go to the DNC and they will now choose another candidate. And in theory, what would happen is if Joe Biden steps down, he has endorsed Kamala Harris. it does not mean she's going to get the nomination. But because he's endorsed her, the precedent for this would be is that nobody's going to run against her. Will that happen? I guess we're just going to have to wait and find out. We've got a couple of weeks now to the DNC, so we just won't know until somebody officially actually says, I'm going for the candidacy. And that's when
Can
it
I
could
just
start to get
ask?
really messy.
Because I assume this means that Kamala Harris has said she's going to stand, but I've not seen anything from her in the last
There
hour or
hasn't
so.
been, yeah, there's not been any official statement from Kamala Harris as far as I've seen since the announcement. I was actually speculating earlier, just behind the scenes with Curtis, that potentially, maybe, complete speculation with no proof, is that because Kamala Harris is almost as unpopular as Joe Biden in the polls, that they may have come up with a plan where he steps down and endorses her, and then she steps down saying she's not the right candidate. Because what, as everyone has speculated for months and months and months, is that if Joe Biden steps down and the Democratic Party sidestep Kamala Harris, that would disenfranchise lots of different types of voters, from people
Yeah.
of color, people of South Asian descent, because she's mixed, and also women as well. It could disenfranchise those voters and
I mean,
then end up losing
which
them the election anyway.
which
I
might
wanna
So
explain
ask
why
quickly.
she's not announced anything yet then
Right. I
as
want to
well.
ask quickly
yes,
about the process, though, because when
okay,
we look at the 2016 and 2020 sort of Democratic nominee, you had obviously votes cast for a particular candidate in each state, and then
yeah,
at the end of each state, you won a certain amount of delegates, and these are pledged delegates, right? Which essentially are behold to the Democratic will, and
yeah.
then you've got super delegates who are essentially they can vote with however they want. So wouldn't I mean, I know it wasn't much of a race, really wasn't a primary at all, which it should have been. There were still candidates who stood against Joe Biden to be the nominee. So wouldn't the person who came second overall, wouldn't they get the most delegates? And they would most likely be the candidate. I mean,
Mhm.
Marianne Williamson, for example, stood in the primary. She obviously would have got pledged delegates and votes. So why wouldn't we be looking at the Democratic side of this?
Well,
Or was that still the case? And then just super delegates can come in and say, oh, it should be Kamala.
it would be different if this was like, I'm going to be the nominee, and then you don't end up becoming the president and you like run. So, for example, what I mean is, if Joe Biden would have been picked as the nominee and he was winning all the delegates, and then he dropped out before he actually became president, then yes, you've got a bunch of candidates like Pete Buttigieg, and I
Mm,
can't even remember who else ran in that race from 2020 to get the nomination. But yeah, you'd have lots of candidates ready to go. They've got campaigns going, but that's not the case because this is an incumbent president who is
right,
not
I
doing a
see.
second term. So the precedent is that nobody runs against him, and nobody did besides Marianne Williamson, which doesn't really count because she's not an elected politician anyway. She just ran on the Democratic ticket. So we don't have those alternative people to be able to run. But obviously, we do have some popular politicians throughout the US, which names have been floated about for over the last few months of who could replace Biden. So I don't know. We're just gonna have to see what happens. See if anybody announces. It's gonna be quite the fight
Mm.
potentially, or maybe not. Maybe
If
Kamala
you
is just
i
gonna go
i
ahead.
if you were a betting man, Lewis, where would you be putting your money at this stage?
It's difficult, right? Because I think the person who would have the best chance of beating Trump right now would be Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. He's been the favorite to replace Biden for a really long time. Practically speaking, if Kamala wants to run, I think for anybody to oppose her will split the Democratic Party. And I think if she does decide to actually go for it, that people shouldn't oppose her. So I don't really know where to put my money. It all depends on what Kamala Harris does next. So we'll have to see.
Yeah. I mean, as we were talking before the show, you said it's possible that Kamala doesn't run. I would be very shocked if that happened. I think she will. And I also really would find it hard to see how the Democratic Party would go against Joe Biden endorsing Kamala Harris. For me, it's 99% certain it's going to be Kamala Harris. But you did mention that she's not doing very well in the polls. Uh, I'll put it to both of you. Why isn't Kamala Harris particularly popular in the United States?
Well, she hasn't really had much of a presence since she became vice president.
Mm,
I believe she was tasked with like tackling the border. Like usually, when whoever gets a vice president, they'll give them some sort of like special task just to keep them busy and occupied. So when Mike Pence was Donald Trump's VP, I think when the pandemic happened, he was in charge of like the pandemic task force. That was his challenge. And for Kamala Harris, it was the border, which obviously, according to Donald Trump, I don't know the exact stats. Everybody throws around different stats all the time, but Donald Trump and the Republicans would argue that they failed at the border. And that is the perception, that is the accepted perception of most American people, is that the border is out of control. So it's a weakness that Harris has been given this one task, and it seems like she may have failed, regardless of what the numbers say, because the numbers don't matter if the perception is that she's failed. On
And
top of
also,
that, oh, go ahead.
well, I was just going to ask it, has she been seen? Because
That's
I've
it.
not
Yeah.
seen much of her for the last 4 years.
Mm.
Even going back to when Biden was vice president to Obama, it was very much, Obama and Biden, the two best buddies together, and that you would see them together at events, you would see them together at press conferences even. And Biden always seemed to have a much bigger presence. Anytime I've seen anything to do with American politics over the last, few years, Kamala Harris has not been anywhere in sight. That doesn't mean that it's not different, in America, but certainly internationally, I've not seen much of it. And if there's an element of that in the States as well, then it could be lack of coverage that's adding to that.
Yeah, so she's very memeable. This is the strength of Kamala Harris, right? We already got comments as soon as we went live with the video about like the coconut falling out of the tree. That was
Yeah.
something that recently happened. I don't actually understand the meme. I don't know what it is, but I've seen it on TikTok. Like she's very memeable, and she has been ever since she ran for president in 2019/2020. So that is an advantage to her. She should take advantage of that if she's very memeable, and she's memeable in a positive way, meaning like there aren't any memes out there of her that I can think of where it's like she's the butt of the joke. That's not true. She's very, very memeable. There's been
She's
a
very
few good
cringe, though. I mean, to bring the
She
political
is.
analysis down to pound shop levels, she's pretty cringe, isn't she? And
Yeah.
also, and to be serious though, I think that look, there's a lot of racism at play here. And I'm not saying that's the reason why Kamala is not doing very well. I personally think that Kamala isn't a particularly strong candidate. If you look at her record, I mean, I was researching Kamala Harris 4 years ago, and she's pretty authoritarian. She has a terrible record when it comes to policing. She's quite strict on that. However, I mean, it was pointed out to me that she was one of the few that quickly called for a ceasefire, which is better than Biden. But I've seen a lot of stuff saying that she's the DEI candidate, right, which is a racist dog whistle. DEI essentially means that, it's institutions that are pushing people of color into positions, not on their merit, but because of their color. And it's like, well, Kamala Harris is an elected politician. It doesn't work that way. But if you've got newspapers, if you've got politicians saying she's the DEI candidate, which is code word for black, then that's going to be an issue at play here. Again, I don't think it's the sole reason why she couldn't win, because I do hate the sort of liberal identity politics, which is, well, Hillary Clinton didn't win because she was a woman. Hillary Clinton didn't win because she was a terrible candidate. She has a lot of baggage with her based on her policy positions. I think one of them based on NAFTA, TTIP, which are trade deals which shipped a lot of jobs away. Whereas Trump, even though he lied in 2016, he said, I'm going to bring jobs back. He had a sort of economic populist message. Hillary Clinton is very pro-establishment. She's not likable. It wasn't because
I don't think
was a
she was
woman.
worse than Trump, though. I mean, and I think that
Well, I don't think she was worse than Trump, but in terms of rhetoric on the campaign trail,
yeah.
she was defending these trade deals, which ships jobs away overseas, was Trump was like, I'm going to bring American jobs back. Of course, he was lying, but obviously
Yeah.
people were like, I like this economic populism, which comes from Trump, which Hillary Clinton represented the establishment, which is why I'll always maintain that Bernie would have won in 2016. So what I'm kind of trying to bring it back around today, I think that Kamala doesn't seem like a particularly good candidate. That's why she's maybe not polling so well. But there is an element of racism, and especially when we're hearing these days of wokeness now. That's a charge you couldn't really give to Joe Biden. Joe Biden, geriatric. Joe Biden, kind of at least when he was a bit more coherent, kind of a strong man, kind of guy. I'm Joe Biden. And all these memes with the
That's as
Dark
bad as my
Brandon
Trump
stuff.
impression,
It's
Curtis.
not. It's not great impressions. The Dark Brandon sort of stuff. Kamala Harris isn't particularly strong, and I do think that unfortunately, a lot of the sort of wokeness bullshit rhetoric and the DEI stuff is going to come and play in this. I mean, do you think that's an accurate assessment there at all? Do you think I'm way off? I mean, that's to both of you, by the way.
The Biden campaign, I think, failed Kamala Harris at the beginning because I remember the order in which things came. So when they're about to, announce their VP, they first said that I am going to choose a black woman, and then announced later on, like weeks later, that it was Kamala Harris. So
Mm,
they did give the perception that they were reserving that seat. Whereas
right. Yeah.
at that point, I think they already knew they were going to choose her, but to
Mm,
try and like campaign of this idea that we're going to choose a black woman, I feel like the order in which they like kind of sold it to the public, it did come across that way to people. I don't necessarily think that's what they tried to do, that they actually only reserved this seat and they didn't know who they were going to pick. They were just going to pick some black woman. I think they already knew they were going to pick her. They just marketed it very badly. So they set her up to fail in that sense. And people remember that as well. They almost did the same as well when they chose Ketanji Brown Jackson for the Supreme Court justice position as well. They marketed that really badly, and it almost like again ties into the idea of like DEI, that somehow these
mm.
people aren't qualified and they're only getting the job because of who they are, which is ridiculous because regardless of all of Kamala Harris's faults, she's just as qualified as the next candidate, and so was Ketanji Brown Jackson as well for the Supreme Court justice position as well. However, it is, it's being sold a lot. I do want to very quickly, without pivoting too far away, bring in very quickly Elon Musk into this as well, because he's fully endorsed Biden. And even today, I saw him, reposting anti-DEI stuff.
Trump.
He's very big on this. Elon, very, very big on this whole anti-DEI stuff. And people like Joe Rogan are. It is picking up. It is gaining pace. There's
Mm.
always been an undercurrent of, anti-wokeness even before we use that word, but it's very much gaining traction right now
Well,
and could
it's
become a
of course
powerful
gonna gain
tool.
traction when Elon Musk says it, because obviously he's a billionaire that owns a communication platform. So
Yes.
I wouldn't even say it's particularly organic. And let's be honest, Elon Musk, as of the last couple of years, has come out and basically sounds like a fascist.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, people might
It's true. It's
disagree, but
true.
he's literally echoed Nazi dog whistles. I mean,
Yeah.
he blames
Just
people.
on
He
that,
blames the rise of uh, well, essentially blame DEI and Jewish people. He said Jews are trying to create wokeness. Essentially, I'm sorry that's not the exact quote. I am paraphrasing here, but he's echoed this sort of stuff. I mean, Elon Musk is
well,
not a centrist; he is a radical right winger, and if he's going to talk about DEI stuff on Twitter, a platform which is huge, and of course you're going to get more and more people talk about it.
just on Musk. I mean, how important do you think it's going to be now for this campaign? Because obviously Trump is no longer on Twitter. He's not been back on Twitter since he got banned from Twitter before Musk took over. He obviously now uses Truth Social, but Twitter played a huge part in the helping the Trump campaign out
Mm.
um, in the last election that he won. And now with Musk, fully supporting him and coming out in support of his campaigns and everything, do you think that's gonna help win the election? I mean, Musk says that he's had requests recently to block lefties, but he won't do so because he wants X to be democratic and to be about
Mhm.
free speech. But there's very clearly been a
Bullshit
shift to the
though.
right on that site
Yeah.
since he took over.
Yeah, just to quickly comment on that whole like Twitter being democratic thing is just absolute bullshit. One of the first things that he did when he bought when he bought Twitter was ban the guy who was publicly tracking his plane, which is public information. Yeah, very 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 pro free speech,
Mm.
Elon Musk. But anyway, I do think it'll have an effect because if we think back to when Trump was elected in 2016 and even didn't get elected in 2020, there wasn't as many people who were more establishment who were supporting him, and he does have a bit more of that type of backing now. Elon Musk is a annoyingly but very powerful voice because before he went full red pill, is that the right word? I don't know. um he did attract a lot of people from the left and the right, like a lot of centrists, like a lot of people liked him from a lot of sides, and he has brought a lot of people down this red pill journey with him. And I do worry how something like that would affect the election if he's gone full blown MAGA now. Absolutely full-blown MAGA. And that does worry me a little bit because it means it opens up the door for more people to do that too.
Let's go to some comments then. I know there's been a bit of back and forth in there. Let's bring them up and we'll read them out. Rachel Atwood, good to see you again. I voted against Biden in the primary this spring. I voted no preference in protest of Biden's policy in Gaza. Completely understandable. I know that was the option for a lot of people, just essentially no preference. It wasn't a primary. It was a coronation, which I think was terrible. I love primaries, and I think that even an incumbent should be primaried because 4 years is still it's not a long enough time to really transform the state. But it's still a long enough time for you to go, do you know what? I don't know if I'm particularly happy with this president. And I think more democracy is a good thing. Let's go to another comment. Aidan Wellsmith, if you are on the left on YouTube, post the assassination attempt, you won't get a say. It's all been removed. I'm not sure what you're referring to here. I mean, like, what does the assassination attempt get taken down? Because I mean, we covered this video, and it's still up there, so it's certainly not been taken down. Another comment. Ali, Lewis's thoughts on Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna is one of the more progressive Democratic politicians again. I think he was part of Justice Democrats. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think
I'm
about
going to
him?
put my hands up and say my American politics knowledge is limited on this person. I know very little about them. So I'm going to put my hands up, not try and bullshit and be like, don't know enough to give an opinion.
The only thing I really know about him, look, I know that he was a leftist politician. I think I last saw him when there was a sort of a streaming convention. I think it was Vosh, Destiny, a few other people, and they met up. Emma Vigland from Majority Report met up with Ro Khanna, and they did some sort of thing together. I don't really know much else about it, if I'm completely honest. Sorry, Ali, for giving you a very long answer on that one. Martin Arnold, if Trump continues with his unhinged, hateful response, it will work against him as people will be sympathetic to Joe stepping down. What do you think about that? Do you think that this will be too partisan from Trump and it's going to turn the so-called moderate voter off? Or do you think that actually this election is about getting out turnout and maybe Democratic voters might not turn out for whoever the nominee is going to be, maybe Kamala Harris, whereas Trump voters will? And remember, there's a sizable percentage of independents. Now, independents, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of independents backed Trump in 2016, but when polled, majority of independents supported Bernie Sanders. A lot of independents, and the reason why they're independent is they're not particularly enthralled with the political establishment. They're not particularly enthralled with a Clinton sort of kind of person, and maybe not a Mitt Romney kind of guy on the Republican side. I feel like they are more swayed by quote unquote populists. So what do you think? Do you think that Martin's right here? Do you think actually no, this is what works for Trump?
I mean, unhinged and hateful is just Trump, isn't it? And it worked. It worked the first time. So I don't know. I mean, I would like to think it will work against him. I hope people will see it and think actually this guy's just a very nasty person, and that isn't who we want running the country. But as is always the case with populist candidates, whether it's there, whether it's elsewhere, in the world, people for some reason gravitate towards them. And I do wonder if there is anything that can be done, and no matter what Trump does at this stage, I still feel. I know Rachel also asked earlier whether we could now say that Trump hasn't got it in the bag yet, whether we could stop saying Trump's got it in the bag now. Biden stepped down, and I think even with the unhinged, hateful response that we always see from Trump that Martin alludes to, I think it's going to take a miracle to see any other sort of result. But I would like to think that the people of America will look at Trump and go,
Well, I mean,
actually,
you
we
say
don't
it
want
worked.
that anymore.
I mean, my analysis is Donald
It
Trump
didn't.
won in 2016. Didn't win because of this sort of this unhinged, hateful nonsense, right?
Mhm.
He won because people were sick of the political establishment. Hillary Clinton represented the political establishment. Of course, Trump represents the establishment too, but I'm talking about how in terms of rhetoric, right? And people were sick of it. And when you had Donald Trump saying populist things like bringing jobs back, right, pointing out a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders pointed out, the failings in the Democratic Party, I think people went with that. But then when Joe Biden ran, someone who was far more popular than Hillary Clinton, it didn't work for Trump. So I don't think it's. I don't know if I'm not sure. I mean, Lewis, do you think? Do you agree with Callum here? Do you think this sort of campaigning works for Trump, or do you think it's going to alienate too many people? I mean, obviously, he drums up his base very well. Is it enough to get back in?
My biggest worry with Trump was that under, the umbrella of Biden's apparent weakness and his
Mm,
failure in his debates, his position on Gaza, even going back to the Willow Project, if anybody remembers that, right, is that he is stained by his past. Like, even though domestically he's had some good policies, he's passed some good stuff, but he potentially damaged his voters in Michigan by his support for Israel. And then now with his weakness, I was scared that there's only a small, tiny amount of voters who I think would go back from Biden to Trump. I don't think anybody who voted for Trump in 2016, voted for Trump in 2020, watched him try to overturn an election,
mm,
watched him be found civilly liable for sexual assault against E. Jean Carroll, then get to see him be found guilty of fraud on top of that. I don't think anybody is not going to vote for him who was already going to vote for him, right? I was only scared about those very small handful of voters who were going to switch to Trump because of Biden's failures.
yeah.
And now with Biden gone, I'm hoping that will go away because I just don't think anybody else is now going to vote for Trump.
And also because Biden, again, like he's compromised, isn't he? I mean,
Yeah.
cognitively. And I guess people are like, we can't vote for this guy. I guess, oh, not to sound like a centrist, but like just putting a safe pair of hands
Yeah.
could be enough to
I
But
get
think,
you
also,
Trump.
I think Trump has hit his ceiling.
it's what people alluded to after the assassination attempt as well, in terms of whether you've just alluded to there, Lewis, that actually everyone that's going to vote for Donald Trump is already going to vote for Donald Trump. However,
Yeah.
there were people that wouldn't vote for Biden that now may go out and cast a vote for the Democratic candidate, whoever that may be, because
Yes.
Biden stepped down, which may help the Democrats out. But again, it's less about what Trump's doing and more about whether or not the Democrats can sort the shit out very quickly and
Yeah.
come forward with a candidate that has got the head screwed on, that does talk sense, that has sensible policy ideas, and that really resonates, that contrasts enough against sort of the brash, in your face Trumpism that we see, to make people have this realization that actually one is a complete and utter clown
Mm.
and the other potentially is a genuine candidate for
But
the presidency.
but there is, I mean, this election, there are zero policies essentially. That's what's missing from this
Yeah.
because Trump can't attack Joe Biden on Gaza because Trump is probably more pro-Israel. I mean, he is more pro-Israel than Biden. Donald Trump isn't pro-worker. The
Mm.
Republican Party isn't pro-worker. Their policies is tax cuts for the rich, deregulation. They support the billionaire class, and of course, we've got more of these tech bro billionaires supporting Trump. And Project 2025 is a dream for capital. It's a dream for people like Musk who want to pay little taxes, right? And obviously all the other things that come with it, which we can discuss about, right? But there's nothing you can really even hold Biden or Kamala on in terms of policy because they don't have policy. Now, of course, the Democratic Party are weak on workers' rights. They're weak on unions, but they're much better than the Republican Party and Donald Trump. The only thing I could say, which was really surprising, is the Teamster union leader was invited to the RNC, which I thought was very strange for the Teamster union to do because the Republican Party are extremely anti-union. They hate unions. They hate workers. I thought that was strange, but that's the only thing. But I don't think they're going to run on that. They don't want to run on workers, are they? And they're
But
going to run on wokeness or whatever, or immigration. That's probably going to be the main thing, isn't it?
Culture wars, same old,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I just pulled up this comment from Aidan because he's saying what's interesting is all three of you are talking about personality, nothing to do with policy. And again, we're touching on that right now. Is because Trump
There's a
never.
lack of policy. You can't talk about policy when there's been a lack of policy in the election. That's probably why we're focusing on
Yeah,
personality.
I don't think people are voting on policy, right? Anyway, and I think that's why
Mm,
personality is important. Despite the fact I'd love to be like voting for people on policy, but the reality is, in the American elections, Trump didn't get voted necessarily in on actual policy. Yeah, maybe screaming about building a wall, but actually, when he was in office, he utterly and completely failed at almost every policy that he said he was going to enact. And then again, he almost got in. Biden only won by about, I think it was like 45,000 votes across 3 states. He almost got in again despite the fact that he absolutely failed. And again, the people who are voting for Trump right now are not voting for policy. They're voting for Trump. They're voting for personality. And again, Biden didn't win on policy. He won because nobody wanted Trump. That's it. And Trump, and domestically speaking, Joe Biden has actually done quite good on his policies. He's tried his best to cancel as much student debt as he possibly could. I think he's cancelled upwards of two to $300 billion of student debt so far. He did the CHIPS Act, he did the Infrastructure Act. I can't remember all the special names of them, but a lot of people would say on paper, Biden has done fantastic on policy, but nobody cares. He's still polling terribly. People feel like he's not done a good job, despite on paper he actually has. His economic numbers are great, but nobody feels it, quote unquote, as people tend to describe. And this is why we end up just talking about personality over policy, because ultimately that's sometimes what it just comes down to, annoyingly, because I'd love to
mm.
be sat here talking about policy
Um,
all day.
One of our comments is just really interesting, and I was kind of alluding to what I was saying earlier. It's quite funny to think that even though Kamala is a black cop US imperialist feminist, it is ridiculous to think that the US will vote for a black woman. So yeah, Kamala is a cop. She's terrible, terrible when it comes to sort of social policy in terms of policing. I think she's been very. I mean, look, I can't. When I was doing my research of Kamala all these years ago, I had more tangible things to talk about. I can't remember specifically what they are, but I know that she is very, very authoritarian in nature. I just want to say also thank you to James Holmes again for the 5 Turn Left memberships. Very, very generous indeed. And Rachel, going back to your comments, AOC was hinting that the donor class might even try to replace Harris on top of the ticket. Not sure how that makes sense. I mean, Rachel, are you saying that Kamala is too pro worker for the donor class, and they're gonna replace her? Because I'd be quite shocked at that suggestion too.
I think the comment, maybe, Rachel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is in reference to the fact that because Kamala is not performing as well, there's no point getting rid of Biden if he's going to fail without getting rid of Kamala as well if she's also going to fail. So they might as
Mm.
well get rid of them both and put somebody in who's actually going to win. I don't know if that's what you're hinting at, Rachel.
I do think it's interesting what you alluded to earlier, though, about the fact that Kamala may also announce that she's going to step down and not stand. And I do think that would ideally that's gonna be the best thing, isn't it? Because if Kamala Harris runs this campaign, then I honestly she may as well just be Biden. And like people have said, America aren't going to vote for a black woman.
She literally, I'm just gonna
She's
point this, she hasn't posted anything.
no,
Anything. It's strange. Something is going on. She's
Yeah.
officially the,
Mm.
unelected candidate for the presidency of the United States, and she hasn't posted a single thing on Twitter.
yeah, and
Okay,
she knew
I'm
she
giving
knew
my
this was
opinion.
coming though, didn't she? She knew this was coming before Biden announced it, presumably. So
Yeah.
they will have had a conversation where he has said, "I am going to publicly endorse you," and given like she's not she's not said a thing, I think what you suggested probably will turn out to be the case. Otherwise,
Okay.
now would be the time to say it, wouldn't it? Biden stands down, but Kamala
Mm.
Harris says, "Don't worry, guys, I'm here to save the day," and she hasn't done that.
I'm excited to say that Turn Left has significantly grown this year, and with that, we've managed to produce far more ambitious content, interviewing high-profile people. We did a 12-hour live election show. There are multiple people behind Turn Left, but we are still working around our full-time work. But we would love it if this was our full-time. It means we could dedicate so much more and to bring even more ambitious content. So if you've been here from the beginning, or you've only recently become a viewer, if you like what we do, then you can help us out. Please like and share this video. Make sure you drop a comment. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your feedback. And we desperately need more independent media. If you want to see a socialist media alternative thrive, then you could be part of that. So if you can, you could support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month, or any one-off donation. We can use that money to upgrade our equipment, to rent out a proper studio, and to start paying ourselves. This is only the beginning. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.